Our top story, forecasters expect Hurricane Ian to cause life-threatening storm surges in the Carolinas. This after the hurricane left a trail of devastation in Florida, where at least 21 people have been left dead in its wake. Debris destroyed boats and houses were inundated. These images are from the bay in Fort Myers Beach. The aerial images show how boats were washed ashore and left lodged between buildings, a trail of complete devastation. The storm has left millions without power, and residents are now slowly returning to their homes, only to find their life's earnings completely ravished. Florida governor has described the destruction in the southwest part of the southern coastal state as a 500-year flood event.
I just got back from surveying the damage in Charlotte and Lee counties, and some of the damage was almost indescribable. To see a house just sitting in the middle of Estero Bay literally must have gotten picked up, flown because of the massive wind speed and the storm surge, and deposited in a body of water.
You know, the refrigerator was over here. That's my generator. Totally underwater. You know, this was over here. Everything just floated all, of course, it floated all around. And I can't even walk through the house because everything is, it all floats up and then, everything is everywhere. So, but, it's just stuff. The main thing in a storm is to keep yourself and your family safe. I mean, you can always move on, right? We can always move on, get more stuff, or not. My load will be lighter.
Hurricane Ian plowed into Florida's Gulf Coast with catastrophic force on Wednesday, unleashing howling winds and torrential rains. A treacherous surge of ocean surf that made it one of the most powerful storms in the U.S. in recent years. Florida authorities say at least 700 rescues, mostly by air, were conducted by Thursday, involving the U.S. Coast Guard, the National Guard and urban search and rescue teams. Hurricane Ian has regained hurricane strength as it powered across the Atlantic Ocean and is now moving towards the Carolinas as a Category 1 storm. The latest satellite images show the hurricane moving away from Florida and towards North and South Carolina.
Doesn't make much difference whether this comes in at hurricane strength or below it storm strength or somewhere on the line, because it's going to be blowing strong winds, and it's going to be all over the state at different levels, as you can see if you go and look at those maps. But we know we're going to have a lot of water.
And it's not only people in Florida or South and North Carolina. Cubans continue to reel under the devastation wrought by the hurricane. It's the third day since the storm wreaked havoc, and parts of the country are still without power. Cubans took to the streets on Thursday, banging pots in protests across several neighborhoods in the capital, Havana, have erupted.
Todo está muy mal, que todo es mentira, que no se resuelve nada, que un supuesto ciclón que pasó, que afectó diferentes provincias, A nosotros no nos pasó nada, Ciudad Habana supuestamente no pasó nada, y el municipio de nosotros, 10 de octubre, hay muchos lugares alumbrados, y ¿por qué nosotros no tenemos luz todavía? Y no nos dan una respuesta de nada.
For more on this story, we're now joined by Dakota Smith, a meteorologist and atmospheric scientist. Mr. Smith, thank you so much for speaking to WION. The question really is, how serious is the situation at the moment? Is the hurricane likely to cause as much devastation in the Carolinas as it has in Florida?
So right now we have a Category 1 storm that's about to make landfall in South Carolina. This storm is a much different storm than it was when it made landfall in Florida. It was a Category 4 storm with 150 mile per hour winds and just tremendous storm surge that came into Florida. When it makes landfall in South Carolina, the storm surge is much less, maybe even half of what it was in Florida. We're looking at like 4 to 7 feet of peak storm surge in South Carolina. That's still going to do some damage and have some significant impacts, but not nearly as bad as it was in Florida. And, you know, as you said, they are still recovering in Florida from that tremendous storm surge and strong winds.
All right. Now, the Florida governor has described the destruction, in the southern part of the state as a 500-year flood event. What is it about Hurricane Ian that makes it so devastating?
It really was the storm surge. It came in at an angle of the Florida coast that really pushed all of this Gulf seawater into these bays and harbors that pushed, in some places, 8 to 10 feet of storm surge. They still have to, get the numbers down, but that's just a lot of water. It can move houses, pushes boats onto land, and really pushes far inland too. The higher the storm surge, the further it can get and impact more people. So really, the storm surge really set the scenario for a disaster in that area. And it's really left, a lot of damage in its wake. And the winds were also really strong too. We've had, storms with 150 mile per hour winds in the last few years, but the storm surge really set Ian apart.
Storm surge is what set Ian apart. Now, of course, two words that we hear all the time these days are climate change. Experts say that Hurricane Ian dumped 10% more rain due to climate change. Is that something you would agree with?
I'm not sure about those exact numbers, but what we do know is that in a warming world, these hurricanes have the ability to dump more rain. It just increases the likelihood and increases the amount of rain that you're going to get in these storms. That's one of the factors that climate change has on this. There's also a storm surge effect too. As the climate warms, sea level also rises, and that just makes storm surge that much worse. You're working, basically the water's already higher than it normally is, and that makes the storm surge that much worse.
All right. Finally, before we let you go, do you believe that, as you mentioned earlier, that it may have weakened to some extent now that it is hurtling towards South Carolina after having left behind a trail of destruction in Florida? Do you think the situation is going to be relatively better in South and North Carolina? And what can you tell us about the level of preparedness in these states?
So like I said earlier, it's a much different storm. The impacts are still going to be great, especially along the coast. I think the biggest impact from Ian will be the rain and the inland flooding. The Ian's going to dump probably like 4 to 6, maybe upwards of 10 inches of rain in some areas, and that can cause a lot of flash flooding, especially inland. The storm surge will also cause some issues, but not nearly as bad as it was in Florida. The winds right now, it's 85 mile per hour sustained winds. That can certainly do some damage, especially on areas that aren't well prepared. I think they've had a good amount of lead time with this. For a few days now, we've known it's going to come into this area and bring these types of impacts. So I hope these people are ready, and I hope if you had to evacuate, you evacuated. But the storm is there, and I think now we're just going to wait and see what the impacts are like, and hopefully people are well prepared.
Well, let's certainly hope that people in these states are well prepared. This is a hurricane that has left people dead in its wake and a trail of destruction. Homes have been swept away and millions are now out of power. Thank you very much, Dakota Smith, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.